in my first debate with Kent, I demonstrated the evidence of evolution from genetics, and I debunked his notion of kinds. In our second debate, I demonstrated the evidence for evolution from the fossil record, and I debunked Kent on numerous things, from the way that sedimentary layers form, to radiometric dating, to plankton fossils, to tiktaalik, etc. And in this final debate, I touched on a lot of that ground before, went back to some of the topics that we covered before, which was pretty clear that Kent didn't really remember our previous discussions on it, didn't do any further reading up on it after our previous discussions, or, it was basically all the same talking points that we already covered in our previous debates. But it was good to be able to ask these kind of questions on a lot of different subjects. But the main theme for my questions tonight was showing that Kent's model of the flood is physically impossible and cannot describe the world that we see around us today in reality.
Well, Grayson certainly has declared himself the winner on every point. Why don't you go to a trophy shop and buy yourself a trophy? Yeah, please do. Put it on your shelf right behind you, okay?
The exact question that I wanted to start with was a question that I actually posed in our last debate, and I know it was a couple months ago, and you said that you, at the time, that you were going to look into it. So I'm not sure if you have looked into it. Oftentimes you seem to say that in debates, but then you repeat the same thing later on. So I'm not sure if you have looked into it. But the plankton question, where you say that there are 4 things that segregate fossils into layers by the flood. You say that they're sorted based on their body density, based on their different intelligences, based on their different mobilities and their different habitats. So the plankton question examines specifically different kinds of plankton, all have the same body densities, the same intelligence, the same mobility, and the same habitat, and yet segregate into different layers in the fossil record. So, there are some that are found in every single layer. They're up there with the birds, and they're down there with the clams, and they're in every layer in between. And it's not like they're identical in every layer. It's like slight variations somehow segregated between all those layers. There's other types that are only in the Jurassic layers and up. There are differences that cannot be explained by a flood. So my question is, how can a flood sort something like plankton varieties that have all the same body densities, intelligence, habitats, and mobilities? How can a flood sort them?
Well, I have a sand toy in front of me with several different colors of sand. They're all between 2 pieces of glass at the same time. Within seconds, it will make a whole bunch of different layers. Hydrologic sorting, it works. It's simple. You can buy these at Walmart, a sand toy. It's not complicated. I don't know that all the fish died at the same time in the flood. It's an awfully big world we live on, and it is round, by the way. So I think that if there was a global flood like the Bible teaches there was, these layers would be forming in different areas, and it might be the elephants die first and end up buried first. It might be the plankton dies first. It might be the diatomaceous earth, which is trillions and trillions of itty-bitty fossils, okay? I can't believe that you guys believe all the trillions of fossils found in the world fit in a dot smaller than a period. You have a hard time with them coming from an amoeba. I don't understand. Let me get to my slide here. So to answer your question, the sorting of the fossils may be generally based upon body density. Clams would be found at the bottom because clams are already at the bottom and most likely to die first. However, that would not have to be the case. Go any place where there's been a disaster, a dam breaks and floods out a village. They can be buried all sorts of different ways. It's not always that order. And I said very carefully when I said this in my seminar, generally, if there's an order, the clams would be found at the bottom, generally because they're the first ones to die. And they're often found petrified closed, indicating they got buried quickly, buried alive, because the clam dies as soon as it opens. But this is not going to be the rule over the whole world. There'd be all kinds of exceptions to this based upon local conditions. Check out when Mount St. Helens blew. Some animals died within minutes, some died hours later. as the heat smoke cloud overtook them, or the lava overtook them, or the ash overtook them. So no, it's not I'll say it again. Generally, there is a sorting. Birds are generally found on top. You guys think that's because they evolved last. I say birds can fly. They're the last ones to drown in a flood, usually. Though if they're near a place where there's volcanic activity, of course they'd die first. So no, it's not a hard, fast rule. I've never said that.
So there are lots of directions that I can take this, but I mean, you're saying that it's general and there like a general order and there's lots of exceptions. So then I'm wondering, like, you're saying, oh, sometimes the elephants die first, sometimes they survive. So then, like, why don't we see this reflected in the fossil record? We don't find elephants in the Cambrian. We find them only in the Cenozoic. We don't find them together with the dinosaurs. I mean, what's the difference between like an elephant and a similar sized dinosaur? Or you say that the birds are up top because they fly, but what about the flying Jurassic mammals or the pteranodons or the flying insects from the Carboniferous period? Like there are lots of flying animals that are not ordered together with the birds. So like the planktons are a great example because you cannot use body density, intelligence, habitat, or mobility, any of the things that you want to try to use. None of that applies to be able to sort plankton. But when we look, the plankton is sorted. So that seems to imply that water, a giant global flood, is not what is sorting these layers.
Well, probably 10 times already tonight, you've used the phrase fossil record. There is no such thing as a fossil record. There are lots of fossils. Trillions of them, maybe even quadrillions if you want to count diatomaceous earth, etc. There's an awful lot of fossils in the ground. They're not a record. None of them have a date stamped on them. None of them can talk. It's man putting his interpretation on these fossils. If I took this to any university and said, how old is this clam? First question they would ask is, where did you find it? Because they date the fossils by the geologic column, which was made up in the 1830s. There is no geologic column. It does not exist. And I ask the question frequently. They say the top layer is 10,000 years old. This one's 150 million. This one's 2.5 billion. Well, where was the Holocene material sitting around for 2.5 billion years? Was it floating in space? How can the layers be different ages? There is no such thing as a fossil record. All the material was on the earth at one time. All of it got sorted, just like all of these sand grains were in here at the same time, and they all get sorted in minutes. There's no such thing as a fossil record. There's no such thing as a Cenozoic or Mesozoic period. All the layers formed at the same time, and all over the world, petrified trees are found standing up, connecting all the layers. You guys never talk about that. A dead tree is only going to stand around for a couple of years. Petrified trees in the vertical position are common. Hundreds, maybe thousands have been found. There is no geologic column. There is no fossil record. I don't know who taught you that, but get your money back. They lied to you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, not only do we talk about upright fossils, these polystrate fossils you're talking about, but I have talked about this with you before in our past debates. The same with this question about where the layers are coming from. All I just heard was a dodge and changing the subject. But sure, the layers are coming from plate tectonics and volcanism. Are you happy now?
No, wait a minute. So moving a layer from here to here by plate tectonics changes the age of it. So if I move this fossil on top of this one, this is now younger. But if I move it this way, this is now younger. So they're all the same age. Moving it, shuffling a deck of cards does not change the age. The top card is not younger. How can you not get it? Plate tectonics, moving them around, is not changing the age of it.
Okay, I don't understand how you cannot get it, because this is about the third or fourth time that I have explained this to you. Like we've done this routine before where I say, Kent, the atoms that make up my body are the same age as the atoms that make up your body. But we are different ages because we date ourselves based on the age of our formation. So we don't date ourselves based on the age of the material that makes us up. It is the exact same for the layers. We date them based on the age of their formation, not based on the age of the material that makes them up. And I've explained this to you before.
Okay, then tell me, how do you date the Jurassic period? If all of the molecules in the Jurassic layer are the same age as all the rest of them, 2.5 billion years old, or 3.6 or whatever, if all the molecules are the same age, how do you know the Jurassic layer is 150 million years old?
You can radiometrically date the igneous layers above and below it to get a bounded range of possible dates.
Now, hold it. You understand, radiometric dating was not even invented till the 1950s. And this
Yes.
geologic column was made up 120 years before that.
Yes, that's why it was so amazing.
How did they date it then? How did
That's why
Charles Lyell date it?
That's why it was so amazing when we did develop radiometric dating and we found out that it agreed with the stratigraphy that we had already done. So at first, when it was first developed in the late 1700s, stratigraphic correlation, which is what we're talking about here, was first done using what you're talking about, by the types of fossils found. That's because it was a creationist that came up with this idea where he was looking at the different layers and he was the one that noticed, hey, these layers only contain these kinds of fossils and they correlate with other layers around the world. So he started it by looking at the different kinds of fossils it contained. But then after that, then geologists started doing stratigraphic correlation based on the type of rock, not the type of fossil. And then after radiometric dating came along, then they started using radiometric dating to do stratigraphic correlation. So there are multiple methods, not just biostratigraphy, which is what you're talking about. There are multiple methods and they agree with each other.
Okay, radiometric dating I cover very thoroughly on my video number 7. I wouldn't trust it at all, and you should not either, okay? I use the illustration. If you walk into a room and find a candle burning on the table and I ask you the simple question, when was it lit? Well, I don't know. We can do some real science, empirical science. We can measure how tall the candle is. Okay, it's 7 inches tall. We can measure how fast it's burning. Okay, we watch it burn for a while, get an Olympic stopwatch, and it's burning an inch an hour. Here we got 2 facts nobody's going to argue. It is 7 inches tall. It's burning an inch an hour. When was it lit? You can't tell unless you make some assumptions. How tall was it to start with? Has it always burned at the same rate? You can't know either of those. Radiometric dating would not have been feasible if the geologic column had not been erected first. The dates have to match the geologic, because the geologic column was invented way before radiometric dating. Fossils, this guy said, I can think of no cases of radioactive decay being used to date fossils, from New Scientist magazine. Earth's atmosphere is 300 miles thick. Most of it's within 10 miles. This is where it blocks out a lot of UV light. And I don't take the whole debate tonight on radiocarbon dating. If you'd like, we can. But there's no such thing as a geologic column. All the layers formed at the same time, and radiometric dating, invented by Willard Libby in 1955, has nothing to do with the age of the Earth. It's a guesstimate based upon how fast has it been decaying. We know they get wild numbers with radioactive dating. They date things that are still alive, and they come back millions of years old. I can show you examples of it here. I don't think you want this, though. You want badly for the Earth to be billions of years old, because that's the only way you can turn a frog to a prince. You have to have billions of years. Let's see. Laboratory. Let's see. Lately, the world's best laboratory has learned during 2 decades of low C14 measurements how to not contaminate specimens. And even for diamonds, these constitute strong evidence the Earth is only thousands of years old. There's radiometric dating. If I asked you if you filled a barrel with water, and I have got holes in the barrel. As you fill it, it starts leaking out more holes. At some point, you reach what's called equilibrium. If the Earth were billions of years old, the sunlight producing carbon-14 and the decay of it leaving turning it back to C12 or other elements would reach a stage of equilibrium. The assumption that we've reached equilibrium is faulty. The Earth it's still not reached equilibrium. So the carbon-14 being formed and the carbon-14 being decaying is not at equilibrium, so you can't carbon date anything. None of the carbon dates would hold up in a court of law. A freshman law student would say, excuse me, Your Honor, you don't know that. You don't know it's always been decaying at the same rate. You don't know there's been no contamination. How can you possibly know that? Radiocarbon dating, a closer look at the flaws. It's totally flawed. It's made up.
Can I address some of that? Because you've made an awful lot of points there. I just want to say that there's more than just radiocarbon dating. There's many different kinds of radiometric dating that all overlap and cross-corroborate each other and involve different assumptions. The assumptions that go into carbon dating are a different set of assumptions that go into like oxygen isotope datings or argon dating or uranium lead dating. The assumptions are all different. They're independent assumptions. And yet the dates we get cross corroborate. There are kinds of radiometric dating that get rid of any assumptions about the starting conditions, like isochron dating, which also cross corroborates with the other kind of dating. We know that the rate is constant because it's based on more fundamental physics. You can calculate the decay rates based on more fundamental particle and quantum physics. So unless you're saying that the quantum physics is wrong, like we know that there are fundamental physical reasons why the rates are the way they are beyond just empirical observations. We can derive them from more fundamental physics. And then lastly, I'll just say that, Kent, you have to explain. If you think that radiometric dating is bunk, you have to explain two things. We are given the amount of ratios between two radiometric isotopes, right? You're saying there's this much, C14, there's this much C12. You're given a ratio. We can tell you what fossils you're going to find in that area, and we can tell you whether or not there's going to be oil deposits in that area, because radiometric dating is used in the petroleum industry accurately to find oil and make money. They wouldn't use this if it just didn't work.
I lived in Longview, Texas, 5 years. A lot of my students were the parents that worked in the oil field. I spent a lot of time talking to them. I've studied this intently. I taught earth science. I understand. You can find oil several different ways, okay? But radiometric dating has nothing to do with finding oil or natural gas. You're simply mistaken. They get bad dates all the time. Living mollusk shells dated 2,300 years old from Science magazine 50 years ago. It didn't work. If a date supports our theories, we put it in the main text. If it doesn't support our theories, we drop it. You don't understand what a religious cult you have gotten yourself into. Evolution is a religious cult. And if you come up with anything that goes against the religion, it won't be published. This is 1970. Freshly killed seal, carbon dated 1,300 years old. If I knew we were going to debate carbon dating tonight instead of geologic column, I'd be more ready. I could get a lot of stuff on that. But I'm just pointing out all the layers formed in 1 year during Noah's flood. You cannot say the layers are different ages in this thing. You can't say these layers are different ages. You don't know that the layers are different ages in anything. You can believe that, and I'm sure you were taught that, but it's simply not true. Go ahead.
So that's a good segue to the next question. But before we get there, I just got to say, you can't radiometrically date seashells. We know this because the way they're formed is like incorporating extra carbon, so it throws off carbon dating. That's why seashells are not used in any radiometric dating. Same with living things. You don't radiometrically date living things. So all that you've shown there is that if you use the method incorrectly, you get incorrect results, which anyone should be able to know. If you use any method incorrectly, you're going to get incorrect results. But I will let you respond to that. But I just want to say that with your point about the layers forming all at once within 1 year, that's what I want to get back to for my next question. So if you want, we can move to that question, or if you have points you want to make, you can make them now.
Well, I have in my video number 7, which people can watch on my on my website, drdino.com. I go through all the problems with all the different dating methods: potassium argon, rubidium strontium, lead 208, lead 206, uranium 235, uranium 238, carbon 14, carbon 13. All of them have the same basic assumptions. And there are thousands of examples where they don't work. The only ones that get published are the ones that match what the geologic column they already believe in. One part of a mammoth was 29,000 years old. Another part was 40,000. Same animal.
That was two mammoths, not the same mammoth.
Okay, two mammoths. That's another. No, that's a different one. Two mammoths side by side, dated very differently, and two parts of the same mammoth dated differently. So, let's see. In the last 2 years, an absolute date was obtained for the Gandong beds above the Trenel beds. It has the interesting age of 300,000 years, plus or minus 300,000 years. Wow.
Well, the date's been refined. It's no longer that's out of date.
My point is, all this radiocarbon dating stuff was in the last 60 years. Way before that, the geologic column was invented and it doesn't exist. It's not common sense to say the layers are different ages. They're all the same age. They were shuffled up like shuffling a deck of cards. Does not change the age of the cards. Here we go. Let's see. What's the youngest card here? Oh, 3 of spades, youngest card. Oh, no, not anymore.
We can move on. We can move on from radiometric dating then back to the geologic column, because I specifically want to address this point where you're claiming that all these layers were formed at once during the flood. Because, Kent, have you ever been to Yellowstone?
Many times.
Yeah, it's beautiful. There's a specific formation at Yellowstone called Specimen Ridge. I don't know if you've heard of it, but at Specimen Ridge, there are a number of different layers. And what makes these layers so interesting and relevant for this conversation is because you find a ton of igneous layers, like from volcanic ash beds, right? From volcanic eruptions. And very, very similar to the kinds of layers we see that formed after the Mount St. Helens eruption. And in the same way, you have, as in the same way as at Mount St. Helens in the eruption, you have the volcanic ash layer formed on top of a preserved fossilized forest sediment layer. Okay, right. So that's exactly what we'd expect if you had a volcanic eruption covering a forest. But at Specimen Ridge in Yellowstone, you have multiple of these layers. So you have the fossilized forest, then you have a layer of volcanic ash, an igneous layer, then you have another fossilized forest. So you had a volcano erupt, cover the forest in ash, and then you had a new forest grow up and mature and become a mature forest on top of that ash. And then it gets covered by another volcanic eruption and another ash bed. And those layers repeat like 20 or 30 times. So you're trying to say that within the span of 1 year during Noah's flood, you could have 20 or 30 full mature forests growing up and then getting wiped out by a volcano eruption, and then a new forest growing up to maturity and then getting wiped out, and then a new forest growing up on top of that. You're trying to say that all of that would happen within 1 year?
Well, you have obvious assumption there that there's a new forest growing each time. I've been to Specimen Ridge. My sister lived up near there, and I sort of went to go visited Yellowstone and all these places. I've been to Mount St. Helens. And yes, volcanic layers during a flood, you would have layers of trees laid down during a flood and then volcanoes going off. You could get all those layers in 1 year easily. And if you go here, North Alabama, I could find it here if you give me a second here. If you go to central Alabama where the coal mines are, here we go. Oh, rats, that's not it.
Just FYI, these kinds of layers at Specimen Ridge cannot form in water. They're an ash layer. So if you add water to ash, you're going to get a kind of like, a mud kind of thing. You're not going to get an igneous ash layer forming. This is a specific kind of layer that cannot form in water.
Well, I think you're mistaken on that. Again, I'm supposed to be talking about fossil record, and there is no fossil record in geologic column. There is no geologic column.
No, this is the fossil.
Right? I have pictures I'm about to show you here of petrified trees running through 2 different seams of coal. They run through the Blue Creek Formation and the Mary Lee Formation right up here in North Alabama, not too far from where we live. You have petrified trees running through 2 seams of coal. Nearly always the coal seams are on top of a layer of clay, not soil, not good dirt. We have clay here in our gravel pit where I live. So you're simply mistaken about the layers having to represent a whole new forest growing each time. No, I'll get to it. I'm sorry. I didn't know that was the topic of the debate tonight. But no, I would say the petrified trees that are standing up, of which there are hundreds of them, are clear evidence that all the layers formed before the tree could rot. Go get that one out of the museum, guys, the real heavy one, the log the guy just sent us from with the bark still on it. Petrified log just fell out of the ceiling of a coal mine here a few months ago. They gave it to our museum. It'd take 2 guys to carry it. Here we go. Okay. Slide number 1175. Okay. Alt-DV 1175.
Well, I agree that those upright fossils had to have formed before the tree rotted away. I mean, I agree with that. Right. Like, you never find those upright fossils going through layers that are millions of years like different. That's not what you find. So I think
That's
we
because
agree with polystrate fossils, but I wasn't asking about polystrate fossils. I was asking about literally like one
okay,
forest covered in ash and then a
here it
new
is right
forest
here.
on top of the ash layer.
You can call Dr. Donald McDonald, who from Troy State University in Alabama, who works in the coal mine and supervises the crew there. They dig out bazillions of tons of coal, and they have the logs sitting right on top of a layer of coal. Huh. Here's the Blue Mary Lee Formation and the Blue Creek Formation, which are dozens, sometimes 100 feet thick of solid coal. When you put all the samples together, sample A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, it's obvious to a kindergartner that those two seams of coal, the Blue Creek contains fossil A, which runs through the seam of coal, and the Mary Lee contains fossil H, which runs through the seam of coal, and yet there are intermediate streams between them. These layers had to form quickly. Specimen Ridge has 27 consecutive layers. Nearly all of them have the roots broken off. The tree was ripped out, redeposited in Noah's flood, and the layers form very quickly. 30-foot tree right here, bible.ca/tracks, running through a seam of coal here, and the tree is coalified, not petrified. Here's it is again. The coal seams are nearly always on layers of coal, layers of clay. Here they come with the fossil. Takes two guys to carry this thing. Had I known it was coming, all right, that thing got away 100 pounds, right?
Yeah, it moves 100, I think, about myself.
Can you move the camera? Set it up here, move the camera down so they can see this. This is part of a huge petrified log. Get the camera. Who's on the camera? Okay. Huge petrified log found in the coal seam in Alabama. Move it down. Billy, I can't see it. There we go. This is an example. This thing goes for dozens of feet through the seams of coal. You are mistaken when you claim each layer of coal represents a whole new forest that grew. In Noah's flood, you would get log mats the size of Texas floating back and forth over the same area, dropping off a debris mat that would turn to coal, and they would all form very quickly. I think all the layers of coal in the world formed in Noah's flood. We don't see coal forming today in any significant numbers. Go ahead and put the screen back up there. Petrified trees in the vertical position. Joggins, Nova Scotia has hundreds of them. Go visit it. That you can walk along the beach and see them. Ian Juby lives up there, ianjuby.org. Check his website. He's done a lot of study on this. Petrified trees in the standing position. You're mistaken. The coal seams are not different ages. They do not contain a whole new forest of growth. Show me where coal's forming today.
Right. Well, I just want to clarify. I never mentioned coal seams or upright fossils. I mean, you the one bringing this up. I didn't mention anything about the coal. I was talking about preserved fossilized forests, which are not necessarily coal. There are lots of fossil plant specimens that are not coal. In this instance, at Specimen Ridge, we're not talking about coal. We're talking about like fossilized, like forest layers. Again, this looks very much the same as what we observed forming from Mount St. Helens, where we find the layer from the forest, and then we see the volcanic ash layer on top. And guess what? That didn't form during a flood. It wasn't like there was a flood that was covering this ash layer at Mount St. Helens, but it visually looks the same as the ash layers at Specimen Ridge. But there are dozens of them at Specimen Ridge. And it's literally, I mean, it's not like there's like polystrate fossil. I mean, it's literally one forest layer, ash layer, forest layer, ash layer. I mean, that cannot be explained in a global flood could not have laid down those layers in that way. It's not physically possible.
Well, I mean, you're saying that's simply not true. God will have to explain it to you Judgment Day, I guess. But yes, during a volcanic eruption, you'd knock it like Mount St. Helens, knock down all kinds of trees. They're still floating in Spirit Lake today, 40 years later. Thousands of trees are still floating in Spirit Lake. And many are floating in the upright position. I got pictures of them somewhere. Go up there and see it. Spirit Lake still contains hundreds, maybe thousands of trees. There's one running through two seams of coal where the tree is coalified. So you're mistaken. All this could happen at one big flood if it's volcano going off, and usually they go in spurts. They erupt for a while, take the pressure off, and then let up for a few days or weeks or years or centuries, and then erupt again when the pressure builds up. But during this time, the log mats are floating around and the trees are settling out. I don't see a problem with it at all.
So if you're
and many
saying
times,
that if you're saying that Mount St. Helens can form fossils like we see with polystrate fossils and can form like layers like we're seeing at Specimen Ridge, then why is the flood necessary? Like what does polystrate fossils have to do with the flood then? Because I could just say polystrate fossils are formed from volcanic eruptions like Mount St. Helens. I mean, that fits your logic if we've seen it happen.
well, the flood would form hundreds of layers. As the tide goes up and down, the water's rushing in and out of the tidal bump. Every 6 hours, 12 and a half minutes, you get a tidal change from high tide to low tide. And depending on the topography, other things affect that. But generally, worldwide, the average is 6 hours, 12 and a half minutes from high tide to low tide. As the tide is coming up, where's the water coming from to fill that bump? It's being sucked in from all sides by moon's gravity. So the water's moving sideways. And frequently, petrified trees, polystrata trees, fossilized, are upside down. This had to be deposited by a flood, by a tree that's been ripped out by the roots. How do you get a petrified tree running through many layers upside down? Did the tree grow the wrong way looking for sunlight?
Can I ask, what about the polystrate trees that we have that show secondary growth, meaning that they started to get buried, and then after that burial started, they continued to grow, and they continued to develop root systems and grow? How is that possible in a flood?
Oh, very possible. Happens all the time. Trees can be ripped out, land someplace miles away, and start to grow again. How do you think they go to any nursery? They dig out plants, they sell them to you, you take it to your house and stick it in the ground, and it grows again. Wow, secondary growth. Thousands of people do that. My wife went today and bought a bunch of plants for the dinosaur adventureland here. It's going to be secondary growth on those roots. So yes, a flood can rip things out, redeposit them, and if they get in good conditions, they start growing again. It's got nothing to do with it. The Bible says, though, the scoffers would be willingly ignorant of that flood. You're proving it to us tonight.
This goes along with an idea that we've touched on before, which was when we were talking about the Grand Canyon. And I brought up the fact that there are fossilized animal tracks on land, like footprints in the intermediate layers of the Grand Canyon that you want to say formed all at once during the flood. And in response to that, you brought up this notion of, oh, the tides go in and out, and not everywhere was underwater all at once. And some areas could have, been under the water of the flood, and then the waters moved away, and then the animals came back up, and then they got flooded again. And you stick by that model, correct? That's what you were just explaining with the secondary growth of the trees, because the trees would have to be ripped up, moved by the flood, and then the flood waters would have to recede enough for dry land to become available for that tree to land on and begin growing again, right?
Well, if you read the Bible dates in Noah, Genesis 6, 7, and 8, Noah was in the ark for 1 year. That does not mean the whole world was flooded for 1 year. We know in the 7th month, the ark rested. So the crust of the earth is obviously flexing up and down. It is still flexing up and down. And, there, my globe. I just had it here. Oh, here we go. Fell down. Okay. So yes, I believe during the flood, parts of the world may be underwater for a few weeks, and then above water for a few weeks, and then back underwater for a few weeks. I don't know. I'll watch the video when I get to heaven and see what happened. But to claim that the flood is the explanation for all the fossils is pretty minor compared to your guys' claim that all the fossils represent animals that came from an amoeba, which came from a dot of nothing exploding. You don't understand what the flood could do to the fossils. Okay, I don't understand it all either. Well, but I'm not demanding that my view be taught. But you guys want all the animals to come from an amoeba, which came from a dot of nothing exploding 13.772 billion years ago. I don't understand how you can reject a simple teaching of a flood forming. Show me where fossils are forming today. How many buffalo died out west in the last 200 years? Show me a fossilized buffalo.
Okay, so I just want to say this is like the 3rd time tonight that you've brought up this dot of nothing exploding and the singularity and the Big Bang. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to ask me about that later, but you can, even though it's not really a topic, but whatever. I mean, we can go off topic, but you brought up...
Just a second. This is the 4th time you've dodged my question. I keep asking you questions and you go on to something else. Where are fossils forming today? Show me, any place.
Well, okay, since we've already talked about Mount St. Helens, we've seen some of the trees that were involved in the eruption of Mount St. Helens begin to incorporate and mineralize. So we've seen the fossilization process start there. But
So
it happens in numerous places in anoxic environments under lots of sediment burials. So
would
it
you
does happen today.
would you agree there are trillions of fossils like the fish fossils found in the Karoo Formation in South Africa, of which we have dozens of them here? Would you agree that diatomaceous earth is almost totally fossilized little bitty tiny creatures, diatoms? There are trillions of them. Where are fossils forming like that today? A few petrified trees are forming near Mount St. Helens. Maybe so. Good observation. We find fossilized dinosaurs. Where are fossilized elephants? Elephants are dying all the time. Are any of them fossilizing?
Well, yeah, diatoms continue to die and form diatomaceous earth today. Lots of animals die and are buried in sediment and in anoxic environment that that are on their way in the fossilization process today. So,
Okay,
this
let's see.
does happen. And really quickly, the last major question that I had is something that you just brought up in saying that you're not trying to teach your beliefs in school. So I wanted to ask because haven't you sold a DVD series called like Public School Presentation, where like the description, I'm literally reading it, it says Dr. Kent Hovind covers how to the legality of teaching creation and discussing textbook selection processes and 4 ways to improve your own county textbook choices. I mean, it sounds like you are trying to get this taught in public schools. And the only reason that you say that you're not is because you don't have the political power to actually get this taught in public schools. But if you did, I think that we would both agree that you would absolutely be in favor of teaching the Bible in public schools as fact and getting evolution out of public schools. I mean, can you be honest enough and agree that you would be for that?
I have consistently said we should teach truth in schools. We should not teach lies. We're teaching the kids all kinds of lies, my video number 4. And yes, I've spoken in public schools and will do so again if I get invited. And we have public school groups that come here to our Dinosaur Adventureland. Does that bother you? That they might be taught your religion isn't true? Wow, you're not a Muslim going to start killing non-evolutionists, are you? So yes, I believe kids ought to be taught the truth. The truth is all farmers have ever seen is cows produce cows. So it's logical to say they must have started from a cow. It is not logical and not scientific to say they all started from an amoeba. You guys have your chart showing an amoeba turning to a cow. That's not science. The kids should not be taught that. No, they should not be taught an amoeba is the base of a family tree with everything on it. That is a lie. It's not science. We don't see that. Nobody ever sees an amoeba produce a non-amoeba or protozoa produce a non-protozoa. But you guys have the protozoa turning to an elephant on your charts. That's propaganda. It's not science. Diatomaceous earth, trillions of fossils. Here's a whale fossil standing on end in the diatomaceous earth. I was out there. I went to Lompoc, California. I got a bunch of the diatomaceous earth right here with fish fossils in it. We have a whole bunch in our museum. You split these things open, and they contain bazillions of fossils. Estimates are there's 800 million fossils, vertebrate fossils, in the Karoo Formation in Africa. Just Google diatomaceous earth, little bitty diatoms, trillions and trillions of fossils. You really think we should teach the kids that all this happened by chance? Nobody made the diatoms. Nobody made the elephants. It evolved from a dot of nothing exploding. You think that is science and we should all pay to teach that?
No, yes, I think that's a straw man of science. I don't think that that's actual science, what you just said, because you're not describing actual scientific theories like evolution or the Big Bang. You're giving a straw man of those theories to make it sound ridiculous, but that's all you're doing.
Wait. Here is a 2021 biology textbook by Campbell, which has all kinds of these family trees of everything turning into something else. And nobody ever sees anything turn into anything else. I got it all marked up. We'll show it on, get it on screen if you'd like some time. But they do show the family trees of everything going back to an amoeba And my point is, this isn't science. These family trees are propaganda. They are not science. This showing, let's see, what do we have here? Single-celled creatures turning into everything. Do you believe this ought to be taught to kids in public school? It is being taught.
That specifically, I can't vouch for those graphics. But I think that the theory of evolution should be taught in public schools, yes, because it is empirically demonstrated as science.
You think it's been demonstrated scientifically that an amoeba, let's see, here we have a human and a bird. Do you believe you are related to a ladybug?
The genetics shows that that is indeed the case.
So I have to add you to my chart. Okay, I got the chart behind me. What different?
You've already added me on your chart with corn.
Have I done that already? Let's see.
I should be on there with corn.
What?
On our very first debate, you asked me if I was related to corn.
Oh, to corn. Okay. I forgot. I got to add you to corn. Okay. So you're welcome to believe that. But that's not science. These charts are not science. They're propaganda. And yes, they should not be taught in public schools, in a science class anyway. In a religion class, sure. You could teach Superman can fly in a religion class also if you want. We don't see any of these creatures produce, and humans have always produced humans. But you believe humans came from and are related to a fern and a shark and, let's see, a starfish and an octopus? I'm just pointing out this is not science. Science is what we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. The word means knowledge. We don't know that an amoeba turned into an octopus. You don't know that. We don't see it. We see octopus have babies all the time, and they come out baby octopus.
So when you say,
so why on earth would we? Okay.
When you say an amoeba turned into an octopus, what do you mean by that? Because it sounds like you're talking about it just somehow magically, you have an amoeba and then it just transforms into an octopus, which I think we should be able to agree is a straw man of what evolution says. So what do you mean turned into?
Okay. Does this textbook show the students that the single-celled protozoa slowly over trillions of generations and quadrillions of years turned into a human? That's what it's showing the kids. Come on now, wake up, son. This is showing the kids a protozoa slowly over billions of generations became a human. We don't ever see a protozoa produce a non. What now?
I don't think it's
You don't think this chart is teaching the kids that the protozoa slowly is turning into everything alive today? They've got lines connecting them, all of them going back to, is the protozoa the ancestor of the frog and the human and the bird and the fish? That's what they're teaching the kids by drawing a line on the paper here.
I think that you're getting confused by the pictures, and you're sort of you're thinking that the pictures in children's textbooks are accurate representations of like the science involved that maybe is too complicated for kindergartners to understand. But I think hopefully you can understand it, that it's not a single amoeba that just is all of a sudden just becoming an octopus or a human. It's populations of single-celled organisms differentiating. Like, it's populations, it's not individuals, and nobody's turning into anything. You're just in the same way that like a French speaker is not giving birth to a Spanish speaker. Like a French speaker always gives birth to a French speaker, and languages still change over time, right? Even though each individual generation is not that different than their parents, each generation's differences add up. See, your kids are different than all the other humans that came before them, right? They're unique. They are different from you and your partner. And their kids will be even more different from you. So you're different from your kids, but you're twice as different from your grandkids. And you're, 4 times as different. It keeps going on. And you get more and more and more different from all your ancestors. Those differences add up every single generation. And you call that genetic entropy. But genetic entropy is not real, and it's been debunked.
Well, I agree there are differences. There are now 400 breeds of cows that man has created to give more milk or more beef, but they're still cow. The differences are limited. My differences from me and my children and grandchildren and my father and grandfather, etc., we're all still human. You can go back thousands of years and look at pictures of people and they're still human. But you think if you go back millions of years, it was a protozoa, don't you?
Well, you can look back and see Homo erectus, which is still human, but looks very different than any humans living today. And you can go deep enough and you can only find Homo erectus, no Homo sapien fossils anymore. So you can see in the fossil records that even just as humans, we've been changing over time.
Well, you can make these charts if you'd like. Do you believe humans are related to gorillas and gibbons and chimpanzees, like this textbook shows the kids with lines connecting them? Is this science or is this imagination?
It is science that we are related to all living animals, and the genetics demonstrate that.
Could it be the genetics are similar because the same guy wrote the code?
No.
Okay. Could it be that Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Word have millions of identical lines of code because people are writing this code to make these programs? The fact that we have similarities with the chimpanzee that cause us to grow hair on our head and they grow hair on their head, wow, it doesn't prove a relationship. The same designer wrote the code to grow hair on the head and to make a jawbone and have teeth in it and have a heart that pumps blood and a circulatory system. There are thousands of similarities, does not prove a common ancestor. It proves a common designer. Why are you running from the designer?
The reason why it's not common design and it is demonstrable of common ancestry is because common ancestry can actually predict genetic similarities, whereas common design fails in its prediction of genetic similarities. And we've been over this in our previous debate.
Yeah, and you didn't get it then either. I predict that my grandchildren will, then one of them just got married, if she has a baby, the baby will be a human. I predict that right now.
Mm-hmm. I would too.
I predict if you go 1,000 generations from now, it'll still be a human.
I would too. That's the law of monophily.
But yet you think the amoeba somehow was able to not do that. I mean, the protozoa. The protozoa here in this textbook, slowly, over millions of generations, became everything. Protozoa are still having babies today. They're called protozoa. Why don't we see it change slowly? Show me the protozoa that is slowly changing today. There are trillions of them out there. Are any of them making babies other than protozoa? Surely somebody's got to be making, a protozoa with hair or an armpit or something.
So, again, we've already been through a single-celled organism evolving multicellularity. Numerous people have brought up chlamydia modus to you. But I think that what you're ultimately doing, what you're asking for, is you're bringing out a 12-inch ruler. And you're saying, prove to me that a mile exists, but only prove it to me using this 12-inch ruler. I want to see it within one human lifetime. I want to see it within these 12 inches. I want to see you show me that a mile exists. But you cannot demonstrate a mile within 12 inches.
So you just admitted, and don't even know it, that evolution isn't seen. It's not observed. It's imagined. Here we have a family tree, the lungfish and the birds and the hawks, all coming from a common ancestor in a 2021 textbook used in public schools. I resent that. I'm going to fight that till I die and pass that. My videos are going to go everywhere, and there's nothing you guys can do about it. We got 15 million of them out there in 42 languages, and we're going to put out as many as we can to say evolution is imagination. It's a religion. You just admitted you can't see a mile on a 12-inch ruler, and you can't see evolution in a human lifetime. So, the word science means knowledge. We know cows produce cows. We do not know cows came from a protozoa. You can imagine that if you wish, and even if it's true, it wouldn't be scientifically provable because it's not observable. These charts are pure imagination. It's not, it's a religion.
So here's the point with the ruler, right? Because you can measure a mile in inches. It just takes more than 12 inches to do so. So the analogy is not showing that evolution is not observable or measurable. It's just saying that is what you are asking for is to demonstrate a mile within 12 inches. Like, you're asking for something that is patently absurd. But If you add up enough inches, you can get to a mile. Just like if you add up enough microevolution, you zoom out on the time scale, you're getting macroevolution. They are mechanistically the same thing. Like there's nothing mechanistically different between microevolution and macroevolution. It's the same process. The only difference is the time scale involved.
Well, this is your imagination kicking in again. You don't know that. That would not be science because we can't observe it. We can observe a bunch of inches add up to a mile. We don't ever observe a protozoa change to something else. There's bacteria that have an 8-hour generation time. Get born, grow up, get married, have babies in 8 hours. So you can observe 3 generations in one day. So one scientist in his lifetime could observe hundreds of thousands of generations, and you could watch this experiment go for generation after generation of humans, and you'll find out they're all still producing bacteria. We don't see it happening. It isn't science. You believe it very strongly, obviously. I think I know why you want to believe it, but it's not science. Science is what there's a lot of things that are not taught in science class because they're not part of science. Science is what we observe, study, test, and demonstrate. Science is limited. You guys want to include your religion into a science class. Teach evolution in a religion class. There's a lot of different religions out there. Evolution's one of them. Believe it all you want, but it's not science.
We can test, observe, and demonstrate evolution, and we can test, observe, and demonstrate the predictions of evolution, which is something that you leave out, but is very important for scientific theories. They make testable predictions, which evolution does, and my favorite of which is Tiktaalik, where the scientists thought that evolution predicts that this transitional fossil would occur between between aquatic lobe-finned fishes and terrestrial tetrapods. We should find a transitional form. We should find it in this layer. They found out this layer occurs right near the surface in Canada. They went there and they found the exact fossil they predicted would be there. To you, that would have to just be a coincidence, but I think that it's stretching the imagination to think that that would be a coincidence, that they could find the exact fossil that they were looking for, exactly where they predicted it would be.
So you believe Tiktaalik, the fossil fish that was found, had babies that were different than itself? Do we ever see any fish?
It actually is not relevant whether or not it had babies. It could have had no babies, and it would not change the argument at all. In fact, every single fossil that has ever been found could have had 0 children, and it would not change anything at all about any of these arguments. It is completely irrelevant. It's a non sequitur. And one last thing, because I have seen you on your own show bring up a fossil of a fish giving birth. So you are aware of at least one fossil that you can say had babies.
And it was a baby fish, wasn't it?
Yeah, because of the law of monophyly.
I don't know how you can't get it. You think the variations we see within the kind, like the 200 or 300 kinds of cows, is evidence that cows are related to a bird. This is the difference between macro and microevolution. Nobody ever sees any of these first 5. You want to include them because it's part of your religion. And you think the variations we see, if we have a fossil of a fish giving birth to another, it'll be another fish. Wow. So that is, now we can't prove that baby lived, okay? In a court of law, you can never prove it. That's not evidence for evolution because we can see it's a baby fish.
You can prove it died. We have the fossil of the dead baby fish. We know it died. Right. We know it didn't live. You can prove it didn't live.
Okay. Do you know that baby had any babies?
Yeah, we know it did not have any babies because it was a baby when it died and fossilized.
Bingo. Was it a fish? Was it slowly changing to something non-fish? Or was it exactly like mama?
Every generation is slightly different than the previous generation. Evolution is defined as descent with modification. Every generation demonstrates descent with modification.
Okay. Every generation may be slightly different, and they vary within the same limit, like all the cows. Let's say there's 400 species of cow, that they're still cow, There are 339 recognized breeds of dogs by the American Kennel Association. They're still dog, some just barely like the Chihuahua, but they're dog. And they always stay dog. Where is it turning to anything else? Because the charts show the amoeba and the protozoa turning to a dog. Where's the evidence for this? You can believe it all you want, but it's not science. It should not be taught in public schools. It should be taught in a religion class. You've demonstrated clearly tonight that you believe, if we had enough time, because time is your God, that it would happen, but it's not seen. We just simply don't. So I'd say, look, you guys believe whatever you want. These family trees are propaganda. They're not science. We don't ever see an amoeba or protozoa turn to anything other than a protozoa. Okay. Protozoa have babies all the time. Show me one that's not protozoa.
Well, I have gone through the Chlamydomonas that went from unicellular to multicellular, and that was observed, demonstrated. So we have seen that. But in the last little amount of time, I kind of wanted to touch on this dot of nothing exploding thing, because you bring it up all the time. And I just wanted to make sure that you are aware that E equals MC squared. You are aware of that and agree with it, right? Because that explains how you can fit all the matter in the universe into one point, because E equals MC squared. Matter can be converted to energy, and photons can be stacked right on top of each other, occupying the exact same space. So you can just convert all the matter into photons and stack them all right on top of each other. That is completely allowed by Einstein's equations in the laws of physics.
Einstein's theory of Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, is a example of how much energy can come from a little bit of mass. We don't know that it's mc squared or mc cubed or mc to the 50th power. It's an equation he made up. There's no way to test it or prove it. It's reasonable. A little bit of mass contains a great amount of energy. You're saying all the energy in the world, the sun is producing a whole lot of energy. It cooked us today around here in Alabama. All the energy the sun has ever produced in all of its history was in that dot. Is that what you believe? Like the show right here. All the stars are producing a lot of energy. All that energy was squeezed into one proton. Is that what you are saying?
Not squeeze it to one proton. It was in one small area, but it's not a proton that it was in. But yes, okay. And physics shows us how this is possible. Like I said, photons can all fit on the exact same space, and matter can be converted to photons or other bosons, which all can fit in the exact same space right on top of each other, occupying the same space. So yes, it is completely allowed within the laws of physics for everything to be condensed into one dot. That is completely allowable based on the laws of physics. Particle physics, quantum physics, cosmology, everything allows for that to happen. There's nothing that breaking any physical laws involved in that.
Okay. So were the protons on top of each other or inside of each other or in the same space? What do you?
There were no protons. All the protons are mass, which are converted to energy, right? They're bosons, right. And protons are not bosons.
Right. So who made those? Who made the photons?
Nobody made them.
They came from where?
So photons can come from a number of different sources. In this case, the photons would have emerged from the breaking of electroweak forces. So the electroweak force had a certain force carrier boson. When the electroweak force separated into electromagnetism and the weak force, it became photons and the W and Z bosons. They differentiated from each other, even though they used to be indistinguishable as a unified boson.
Okay. And where was this taking place? Where did space come from for this to take place in? Where did space come from?
The origins of space and time, since they're part of the same 4D manifold, are still unknown, because we're still trying to figure out if space and time are even fundamental to the universe. The quick answer to what you always ask is we don't know, because the Big Bang doesn't describe anything from before the first Planck epoch. So There's no description for the very first instances. We literally lack the math and the physics to be able to give any answers to what was the very first earliest instances like. Okay. So the answer is we don't know. Maybe in the future, we will develop better physics where we can understand some sort of unified field theory and we can understand what was going on and we can answer those questions and we can understand where space and time come from. But at the moment, we do not have the physics and math to be able to answer that. So the only honest answer I can say is I don't know.
Thank you. So until you know, should this be taught in science class as if it's true?
It should be taught that we don't know.
Okay. It's not taught that. It's taught this is the way it happened. I got the textbooks right here. They teach, 13.772 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was in a dot and it exploded. That is being taught, but you don't know. It's not science. Science is what we know. Knowledge. Look up the word science, seer, Latin, to know. What do we know? We know cows produce cows. We do not know a cow came from a protozoa. So it's not part of science. Now, I'd like to ask you one final question. I got a bunch of Boy Scouts coming here to go to our camp out, okay? 13.772 billion years ago, all the matter and all the energy was in this little tiny photon in your mind, okay? What was 13.773 billion years ago? What happened then? 13.774 or 14 or 15 or 2 billion trillion years ago. Was time created at the same time as matter and space?
So yeah, time is relative, right? That's what Einstein showed us. So our universe's relative time does not extend past the Big Bang that we know of. So it doesn't make sense to ask what was before the start of our universe's time. There could be times that are not our universe's times. I have no idea. Okay. I'm not making a claim about that. There could be times before our time. We have no way of knowing that. All that we can demonstrate using the cosmic microwave background, our own observations, is that it is factual that at one point, the universe was in a smaller, hotter, denser state that was so dense that atoms could not form. So there were no atoms, and we see that in the cosmic microwave background. So we know that at some point, that was the state of the universe. There were no atoms. It was all just an ionic gas cloud for quite a while. And we know before that, I mean, we have several different means of knowing before that, like with like neutrino background and with like the different ways. I mean, it gets kind of complicated into the physics of like, the acoustic oscillations in the CMB, but there are ways of determining before the CMB. So we do have some empirical measurements from these early time periods, but before that, there's no way. We cannot provide an answer. We don't even know if your question makes sense logically. What was before the start of time? That doesn't sound like a logical question.
Okay, gentlemen, let me jump in. And Ken, I want to give you the opportunity to respond. We do have some audience questions that we need to honor and get to. And so, firstly, excellent discussion. It's been a ton of fun. I love the back and forth, free-flowing nature of it. Grayson, since you started the discussion, why don't we give Kent a quick final word or response, if that's fair, and then we'll jump into some audience questions as we wind things. Okay, perfect. Kent, go ahead. Final word.
Grayson, I challenge you to find any physicist on the planet who can squeeze a gallon of water into a dot the size of a proton. Water cannot be compressed. There's a whole lot of water on this planet and maybe out in space, and there's a whole lot of stars. And you think, I can't understand how a grown man can believe it all fit in a photon. Who taught you that? Go slap them hard and get your money back. You can't get a gallon of water into a dot. You couldn't squeeze a gallon of water into a pencil eraser size. Please do that for me. How much energy would that take? You guys have been taught something that is so stupid, I can't believe a grown man would believe that. This isn't science, it's imagination. Just imagine everything squeezed into a dot. No, I don't want to imagine that. That's not science. We can't squeeze a gallon of water into a dot, let alone the whole Pacific Ocean. It's not science. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. That's the
I'd
first
love
law.
to address that really quickly if I can.
Sure.
Just like we absolutely have done what you're asking, or at least an equivalent at the Large Hadron Collider and at other particle accelerators. We actually have, like, if you were to condense water, right? Eventually, you would strip away all the electrons. Eventually, you would only have the nuclei of the water. If you keep compressing it, you're going to break down the protons and neutrons themselves. And all you're going to have is a quark gluon plasma. That's what's going to happen if you keep compressing that water. And we have formed quark gluon plasma experimentally. We have tested, measured, demonstrated that we have formed quark gluon plasma in particle accelerators. So we have taken the kinds of energies involved in like a gallon of water or whatever, and we have produced compressed matter like quark gluon plasma of those high energies. So we have done experimentally like what Kent is talking about of if you compress water all the way down, eventually you're going to get quark gluon plasma, and we have formed quark gluon plasma. So we've done it. We have experiments where we've done it.
I do not believe that for 1 second. I'd like to see the documentation of that. And where did the energy come from to compress it? Who bought the gas to run that machine? And who built the machine to compress it? You don't get it. Donnie, I need to go soon if we can. Let's get the audience questions. These go forever, and he's not going to get it, but I'll keep trying. Go ahead. Audience questions. Are they here?
No.
Okay, good. Not here yet. They're late. Go ahead. Hurry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, Grayson and Kent, appreciate the thorough back and forth discussion. We'll start with the super chats just so we make sure we get through those, and then we'll get through as many other questions as we can until your guests arrive, Kent. So, okay, here we go. First question comes in from Eric Peterson. Thank you very much for the support to the audience. We've had an excellent audience, got over 200 people right now, and lots of good feedback. So Eric Peterson, thank you for the super chat support. Question for Grayson. Plants need insects to pollinate to make fruit to feed animals. What is the evolutionary process to have all this happen at the same time? Too amazingly complex and interdependent for chance. Go ahead, Grayson.
So if he's not all plants require animals to pollinate for them. Not all plants make fruits. He's specifically only talking about angiosperms, which are the types of plants that have fruits. And these are relatively newcomers on the scene in terms of evolutionary time. For most of plants' history, there were no fruits, there were no flowers, there were no insect pollinators. So this is a relatively newer development. We have plants functioning long before we have any of this in place. I think broadly what he's just asking for is how do symbiotic relationships evolve, to which the answer is positive feedback loops. So like it starts where obviously one organism is not reliant upon the other, but it starts as a beneficial relationship that then builds to be more and more of a share of resources for those organisms until eventually you get to the point where each organism is reliant upon the other for their evolutionary niche. So the kinds of symbiotic niches develop over time. It's really not that much of a mystery. It doesn't break any science. It's not irreducibly complex like many creationists claim.
Okay, thank you, Grayson. Kent, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, it's a fair question, and he did not give an answer at all. He gave an imaginary story. We don't see this happening. It is a fact that many plants require certain insects or birds or something, animals, to pollinate them. Many are very specialized, like the honey creeper with the curved beak. The beak has to be just right. Lots of animals and plants have a symbiotic relationship that I think defies an evolutionary, at least it defies a scientific explanation. You can make up a story all you want, but that he didn't give any science to show this. We do know there are plants that require certain animals or insects to pollinate them. We know that. The Bible says the insects and plants are all made in 1 week. Not a problem. I believe that. Can't prove that scientifically. He can't prove what he just said scientifically either. So he just demonstrated he has a religion that he wants all of us to pay to teach the kids. Teach the religion at your own expense in your own. Go start an evolution school and teach anybody who wants to pay and come learn it. That's not science. We don't see any plant slowly evolve the ability to accept an insect or insect slowly. The symbiotic relationship is a great question. I think it's unexplainable with evolution. You can make up all the stories you want, but that's not science.
Thank you, Kent. And Grayson, quick final word. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that even Kent would agree that irreducibly complex symbiotic relationships can evolve. I think that I can actually get Kent to agree with this because we can do it within a micro evolutionary context whereby both the plant and the bird stay a plant and bird. They stay their same kind, but they evolve a symbiotic relationship. And the way we can do this is like at first the flower is of an intermediate length where lots of different species are capable of pollinating it, right? But there's a range, and some of the flowers are longer than others, and those long flowers have to be correspondent with types of birds that can reach them. So only the birds that have the longer beaks can reach the longer flowers. And this is mutually beneficial because without the long birds, the flowers would die. Without the long flowers, the birds would have to compete for resources with the other birds. So over time, a microevolutionary change will occur. And Kent would agree that over time, the long-beaked birds are going to continue to have long-beaked bird babies, and the long flowers are continue to have long flowers, and the range is going to get more and more extreme until eventually you're going to have a subspecies of bird and a subspecies of flower where the flower can only be pollinated by that certain kind of bird. And with that, you would have had only through microevolutionary changes that Kent accepts happen, you would have had the development of an irreducibly complex symbiotic relationship.
Okay, thank you for the final word there, Grayson. Next question comes in from Horazio. Thank you very much for the support, super chat, and question. This one is for Kent. How is a God that kills off its creation smarter and more worthy of glory than one that allows it to evolve and diversify? In brackets, Horazio's talking about theistic evolution. Thoughts, Kent?
Well, you have to define what you mean by that word evolution. If you mean, horses and donkeys might have had a common ancestor, maybe. Horses and butterflies, no. So God, God can do whatever he wishes. God made the world, it's his. He can destroy it if he wants. He can flood it if he wants. He can set the rules. He can say, thou shalt not. He can give 10 commandments if he wants, or 100 commandments. That's the God, it's his. If I build something here at Dinosaur Adventureland and it belongs to our ministry here, I can decide to burn it down if I want, or shoot it full of holes, or whatever we want. It belongs to us. So the God who created the world owns it and can decide what he wants. He decided you have to be perfect to come live with him in heaven. If he let people into heaven like we are, we would ruin that like we've ruined this place. So when we all realized, man, I can't obey God's laws. He said, okay, I'll come do it for you. And Jesus was God himself in the flesh, lived a perfect life, never broke a single law, did everything perfectly, allowed them to kill him, and his blood is put onto my account. I'm the one that deserves to die. So is Grayson. We deserve to die for our sin. But Jesus lovingly said, I'll pay for it for you. If you'll ask me, I'll forgive you and make you one of my children. And when I did that 54 years ago, a seed got planted in my heart and has been growing, trying to change me into a new person. So yes, I think God can kill off his creation if he wants. I don't think there's any evidence for evolution, so why would I accuse God of doing that? We've never seen what he just gave as his illustration of slowly getting longer flowers and longer beaks. That was not observed. It's imagination. SpongeBob. Oh, I forgot my SpongeBob. He's right here. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Kent. Grayson, would you like to add anything to the question?
Yeah, well, all I said was microevolutionary changes, which Kent does agree are observed. So whatever. On this question, I don't really have anything to add because I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God, so I don't really have anything to add to this. So I mean, we can move on.
Appreciate it, Grayson. Did you want a quick final word, Kent, or move to the next question?
That's good. Go ahead. Get more questions in here.
Okay, here we go. Question from Whether or Not. $10 super chat. Thank you very much. Question for Dr. H. Is it possible our genetics and DNA only makes our coats of skin, and it is really our spirits or life that makes us all equal in who we are?
Well, I think the Bible clearly teaches man is a triune being. We have a body, a soul, and a spirit. Animals seem to only have a body and a spirit, no soul. Plants seem to only have a body. I think there are three different kinds of life on earth: plants, animals, and humans, which are very different. Best illustration I could give for that is the human brain. You have one brain, you can think about things, but you can also think about what you're thinking about and pass judgment on that thought. You can say, wow, that's a bad thought. How can you pass judgment on your own thoughts? Do you have two brains? No, one brain doing two things. You also are doing things that are unconscious with your brain, controlling regulation, body temperature, circulation, blood pressure, healing, posture. So one brain doing three things is maybe a crude analogy of how God can be Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and how man can be different than animals. Humans are different. We have a consciousness of life, and we have a consciousness of a God, at least unless somebody educates it out of you, like they did for Grayson. So I think the genetics don't just make coats of skin. I think it seems to be genetic, some things about our personality. Some people are just sweeter than others or meaner than others. And breeders do this with dogs all the time. They try to breed dogs that are mean, to be, pit bulls or something like that, or breed dogs that are more gentle. Or there seems to be more than just the skin in the genetic code. I don't know where you can point to it, or I can't show you which gene is doing it, but I think most breeders will tell you there seems to be a genetic connection between attitude and personality also. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kent. Grayson, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't really believe in souls or spirits or any of this hoodoo voodoo kind of spiritual stuff. But I will say that Kent is correct about like personalities, relationship with genetics, and how there is a genetic underpinning for a lot of these kind of more personal characteristics, including there is some evidence that there's a genetic underpinning to your belief in God. So whether or not you're predisposed to being more of a God believer or being more of an atheist does seem to have some amount of genetic basis. So God might have just made me an atheist, or at least predisposed to being an atheist. And that was just God's plan for me, I guess.
Thank you, Grayson. Kent, it was your question. Did you want a quick final word?
All right, we'll see how that holds up Judgment Day, Grayson. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right, next question comes in from Luke, $5 super chat. Thank you very much. Question for Kent Hovind. Floods remove material from the surface of the affected area downstream to lower areas. Where is the evidence of erosion from the flood?
Almost the entire world has hundreds of layers. All of that is evidence for the flood. The top of Grand Canyon is 7,000 to 8,000 feet above sea level. The river enters the canyon at 2,800 feet, less than 3,000. Rivers don't flow uphill. If you plugged up Grand Canyon today, a big lake would form behind it. That lake got too full, I'm guessing 50 years after Noah's flood, cut through the sediments and probably formed Grand Canyon in 1 week. Come Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama, and see our demonstration where we remake a miniature Grand Canyon a couple times a day. It happens very quickly. All of the layers of the so-called geologic column are evidence of this flood. The shuffling back and forth. Where's my sand art toys? Here we go. You can shuffle these back and forth all day long and make hundreds of layers. The flood of Noah, with the tide going up and down and rushing in and out, would make all the layers. Watch my video I did the other night on erosion and the sedimentary experiments at Colorado with the Navy plumes they have there. Great. Layers form sideways, not vertically. So I covered that on, there's a video called Experiments in Stratification. We covered that, was it last night? Yeah, it's on go to drdino.com, and we have about 20 different places where we post our videos. Watch any of them, it's all on there. So where's the evidence from the erosion from the flood? That is what is the geologic column that they talk about. All that is actually 1 year of Noah's flood.
Thank you very much, Kent. Grayson, anything you'd like to add or respond to?
Yeah, on topic of the evidence of the flood, I think I have demonstrated numerous times tonight using numerous different topics that the flood could not have happened. The plankton ordering shows that The flood could not explain that. The igneous layers, like at Specimen Ridge, show that a flood cannot possibly form that. We didn't even get to things like Aeolian wind-formed deposits, like at the Grand Canyon and in Utah, and we didn't even get to limestone, which could not form during a flood. And we have huge limestone deposits, which could not physically form in 6,000 years in a flood. And with a funny thing with limestone is you have another version of the heat problem, where if all the limestone on Earth was formed in 1 year from a flood, the amount of heat that would have been released, because remember, the precipitation of calcium carbonate is exogenous, it releases energy. The amount of energy that would have released if all that limestone were formed at once would have heated the world's oceans over 1,000 degrees. So there's a whole new heat problem on top of the heat problem creationists already have with the flood. So there are numerous lines of evidence that show conclusively that a flood would have been physically impossible to have formed the world that we live in today in reality.
Okay, thank you, Grayson. Kent, question was for you. You can have a final word if you like.
Well, that's a whole new debate. I like that. Thank you so much. I think you're mistaken about that. The heat problem. There is no heat problem. I covered that in my video number 4. But okay, where is the evidence of the erosion from the flood? Floods don't always erode away materials. They sometimes deposit materials. There's plenty of water on the planet right now. I think everybody would agree there's enough water out there to cover the world. Oceans average 12,000 feet deep. You know, if you smoothed out the world, the water would be 8,800 feet deep everywhere. There is plenty of water to flood the world. And the Bible says at the end of the flood, Psalm 104, the mountains arose, the valleys sank down. I think the crust of the earth is all broken up because of Noah's flood and the fountains of the deep breaking open. And it's maybe way more than interesting that the mountain ranges follow the coastlines. Rocky Mountains follow the Pacific. Appalachian follow the North Atlantic. Andes Mountains follow the South Pacific. I think the flood is the only explanation for the mountains and the crust of the earth we have today. The earth is broken up because of Noah's flood and the fountains of the deep, and some of the plates are still moving. And we still have earthquakes and volcanoes and plate tectonics and fluctuations still happening. So his question is incorrect that the floods remove material. Sometimes they do, sometimes they redeposit material. So it all is doing shuffling it around. Shuffling a deck of cards doesn't change the number of cards in the deck. They're still 52, or it's got a joker 53. Okay.
Really quickly. Sorry about this, Donnie, but really quickly, I wanted to ask Kent, because you showed that globe. I want to ask, what do you think of, because I've encountered this personally. I've encountered a Christian a creationist that has not just the 6 stages of evolution. They're using it from you. They're using your terminology for the 6 stages of evolution there, but they're adding a 7th, and they're adding the 7th one as the heliocentric model is the 7th stage of evolution. And I've literally seen them accuse other Christians of being evolutionists because they don't believe that the earth is flat and they believe in a heliocentric solar system. And they're saying that's the theory of evolution. That's the 7th stage of evolution. What do you think of that? Like, they're using your model, but they're using it to try to push a flat earth.
Yeah, people use guns for killing people too. You tell them that I said they are stupid, they are wrong, the earth is round, it goes around the sun.
Okay, well, I'm very glad that I can tell them that you said that.
Good. Tell them they're stupid. They should quit teaching that. It's dumb. Okay?
Hey, right. We agree. We finally agree. We did it.
Yeah. There you go. One day, Kent and Grayson can team up for a flat earth debate. Wouldn't that be something to see?
That'd be fun.
Okay, question from Boomer21. Looks like I got a fellow Canadian here with me. Appreciate the support. And question for Grayson. So here we go. If there was a geological column, then how do you explain human footprints being found amongst dinosaur footprints?
Yeah, it's quite simple. They're not. Like, you can... I live pretty close to the whole famous like Glen Rose area of Texas where they supposedly had human footprints together with dinosaurs. Those were debunked. They weren't human footprints at all. In fact, every instance of this that I have seen is not actually human footprints and not side by side with dinosaurs. So each one can be debunked. There is not an instance where you have human footprints in the same layer as dinosaur footprints. Doesn't happen.
Kent, any thoughts?
Well, two thoughts. I think he's completely mistaken. I've also been there and seen the human footprints with dinosaur footprints and have castings of them, and they're certainly human. But that's, I'm wondering, Donnie, $5.50 Canadian. Is that like 20? Is that like 25 cents American now?
I don't know. Yeah, it's a pretty big difference there. It should be able to get me a coffee for one of these debates.
I would ask people to watch my video number 3, Dinosaurs and Humans Living Together. There's overwhelming evidence, not just from footprints, but from stories of people killing dragons and the pictures they've done on artwork and cave drawings and stuff like that. And there could be a few small dinosaurs still alive. Watch my video number 3 about dinosaurs. But I know dinosaurs are the sacred lizard for the evolutionist. They're huge compared to today's creatures. How on earth did they live on this planet? You had to have greater oxygen, greater air pressure. You can't get an animal that big on today's climate. So I think my video number 2 talks about what the world was like before the flood came. Explains it all. God made the world in 6 days. It was very different. People lived to be 900, including dinosaurs, and they lived with Adam and Eve. They did not live millions of years ago. I think they're lying to the kids to teach them that.
Thank you, Kent. Grayson, real quick final word, because we got 2 more questions to get through, and we'll make sure we do a power round. So go ahead, Grayson.
Yeah, I mean, I just have no idea to respond to all of that. Dragons and you know, Sir Lancelot proves the dinosaurs. I don't know. I mean, like, it's all a little bit far-fetched. I don't think that dinosaurs lived with humans. I've never seen any evidence that that occurred, even though I have watched Kent's videotapes. I don't see any compelling evidence. And yeah, I mean, we definitely the dinosaurs have different metabolisms, and the composition of the atmosphere was different back then, and so was the climate. And yeah, I mean, it's not a big mystery about why dinosaurs were able to get big. Also, dinosaurs are not lizards. That's just a colloquialism. And there are still dinosaurs alive today. Kent is actually right about that. We call them birds.
Woo.
There we go. We're having some fun in this debate. Okay, I predict a round 4 in the future. We might have to start a new debate trilogy. We'll have a couple end game debates in this debate series. Okay, so Eric Peterson, appreciate the support. Question for Grayson. Eric's coming at you, Grayson. He is saying, we have found modern animals unevolved, such as seagulls found with dinosaur fossils, coelacanths dated extinct 65 million years ago, found alive today. Explain, please.
All right, so this is kind of 2 questions. I mean, one, he's talking about how are living fossils a thing, and the other part, he's saying we found seagulls unevolved in the age of the dinosaurs, which is not true. If you go back and you look at those ancient bird fossils from the Mesozoic, guess what you'll notice? They have teeth. Guess what birds don't have today? Teeth. No birds today have teeth. But when you go back in the Mesozoic and you look at birds, well, guess what? Almost all of them have teeth. Isn't that weird how they have changed? Weird, huh? So, no, they're not the identical seagulls back in the dinosaur era. That is just a misunderstanding. But in the question of how can organisms remain phenotypically very similar over long amounts of times, like coelacanth, the question is all about evolutionary pressures. You see, organisms evolve in response to pressures from their environment. So they fulfill a certain ecological niche in their environment, a role that they fulfill. If nothing changes about that role, and there's no need for the animal to change morphologically. If a crocodile is still performing very successfully in its crocodile niche, why would it need to change? Unless the environment around it is changing, there's no impetus for that creature to change. There's no pressure for the coelacanth to change if the coelacanth is still able to eke out a successful existence as a coelacanth in its coelacanth niche. Like, things do not like there's the whole concept of, you know, their evolution occurs in spurts and starts. Like, you have long periods of stasis where there's relatively little change because there's not much pressure from the environment to change. And then all of a sudden, you have a drastic environmental shift that changes the whole ecology around, opens up new niches and gets rid of old niches from being viable. And all of a sudden, the pressure is on, and these organisms have to either adapt, change, or die off.
Okay, thank you, Grayson. Kent, anything you want to quickly add?
You and SpongeBob got to be brothers. Just imagine all this happened. It's not science. It's what you imagine. Now, seagulls, yes, I think different types of fossils are found together, but the existence of fossils only proves something died. Seagulls, I think bird fossils can be found in probably any layer. But who's finding them and who's reporting on them? If you in communist Russia or communist China tried to publish an article against communism, you probably would not get it published and might end up, in prison or their head chopped off. I think today in academia, it's just nigh unto impossible to publish anything against the evolution religion because you get excommunicated. Nothing but a religion. So go ahead.
Thank you, Kent. Yeah, Grayson, quick final word. Go ahead.
Yeah, just on the concept that it's impossible to publish anything that bucks the evolutionary consensus, that's not true. And I love this example because Mary Schweitzer is an awesome scientist, and she's a former creationist. She was a creationist that went on to get her own degree. And in the process of getting her PhD, she realized creationism doesn't make any sense. And she became a practicing scientist. And she went on to demonstrate like that you can actually have organic materials preserved in like dinosaur bones for much longer than the consensus was thinking was possible. But she demonstrated this. She's still not a creationist, right? She definitely does not think that this is evidence for creationism. And she definitely does not think that this is evidence that these bones are younger than 65 plus million years. But she was publishing material and getting a lot of backlash from people because she was going against the consensus. And guess what? She was a brave scientist. She really did do science, and
10 seconds.
she prevailed in the end. And her findings were shown to be correct. And guess what? She's a very prominent evolutionary scientist. Like, she's not a creationist still. She's, So I think that she's a great example of how you can buck the consensus, you can do great science, and you can still get published and be successful in your career.
Okay, Brandon has a super chat here. I think this might have to do with the first part of your discussion, gentlemen, where you talked about languages and analogies in relation to evolution. So Brandon says, between two generations, you can't see change in language, but you can very easily see it between several generations. It's a great analogy. Not really directed to anybody in particular, but Kent, why don't we start with you? Did you have any thoughts on that statement?
Well, there's not really a question there. I moved from down south, and they talk funny down here. Took me a while to learn what y'all mean and all y'all. There's a difference. All y'all and y'all. So it's still English, barely. So this is it. But again, that's unrelated to biology. I don't know how he thinks that's an analogy that goes along with biological change. We don't see any biological change. None. My neighbors, when I was a kid growing up, were from France. They moved over after World War II. Spoke fluent French and broken English, and but their kids grew up to be French and English, and one of them was my teacher teaching French in high school. So I think that we do see languages. This is such a lousy analogy to go along with evolution. What if I do the evolution of the car, or the Model T turned into a Mercedes? A whole bunch of intelligent people helped make the changes, and there's been intelligent people making the changes in the language, adding new words. This is not an analogy that has to do with biological evolution. Brandon, think about it one more time.
Thank you, Kent. Grayson, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I think that the whole point of an analogy is like two things that are different, but have certain like aspects of them that are analogous. And this is an exact example of that. I mean, he says that just because it's not biological means that it's not analogous. Well, I really love that logic because you know who loves to use cars and books as an analogy for living things? Kent Hovind. He loves using like cars and watches and pens and books. He uses books as analogies for genomes all the time. So can I just say, well, Kent, those things are not biological, so there's no analogy. Do you think that Kent would accept that logic? No, he would not accept his own logic when it's used against him. So why should anyone accept his logic?
Kent, I guess it was directed more so at you if you wanted a quick final word on it.
No, let's go on. Let's get a few more questions done. I got to get going here, brother.
All right, perfect. Let's go. Let's start wrapping it up here. Bubblegum Gun, $2 super chat. One of your biggest fans, Grayson, he's coming at you. Quick question. How does Grayson explain away the London Hammer? Are you familiar with the London Hammer at all, Grayson?
I'm not familiar with the London Hammer. I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page right now. It just looks like a hammer that was found in London, Texas. And yeah, I don't know enough about it in order to make any kind of statement at this point. This is my first time ever hearing about it. Kent, I don't know if you've heard about this before or not.
I have. I know the guy who owns it now, and there have been quite a few things found fossilized that are human artifacts. The London Hammer, the handle was fossilized. There have been quite a few things found as turned to stone. Okay, we have a petrified pickle here in our museum, petrified teddy bear, petrified rose. It does not take long for things to petrify, is the point. The London Hammer was apparently a World War II hammer that was found with the metal part still there. It's a type of a sledgehammer. I think, I forget how they use it for. And the handle is turned to stone. The point would be, things can petrify rapidly. Since World War II, it turned to stone. It's illustrating clearly, it does not take millions of years for things to petrify. That I think all the petrification we see, petrified clams, petrified everything, happened, petrified fish fossils, happened because of Noah's flood, rapid burial. Today, an animal dies, it gets scattered, it doesn't petrify. Nobody sees petrification or fossilization taking place anywhere.
Okay, thank you, Kent. Yeah, sure. Grayson, quick final word.
Yeah, I don't really get how this is this is demonstratable about, because like the hammer just looks like a basic 19th century American style miner's hammer, right? So the idea is that somebody, like, somehow this hammer had to end up in the rock layer, right? I don't understand. Like, it's not like this hammer is permineralized or fossilized, right? You don't get a fossilized piece of iron. Like, iron does not really permineralize. So I don't really understand.
I think they're saying that it's.
I just don't know enough about this particular case.
I think they're saying it's a tool, Grayson, that was encased in lower Cretaceous rock. But because it's a man-made tool, you know, how did it show up in the Cretaceous? But I don't really know all that much about it.
Yeah, I guess I'm just going to have to do more reading on this to even understand, like, what creationists are even trying to demonstrate with it. Because I really don't get why this is so weird and unexplainable for, like, an evolutionary model to understand. I really don't get why this is supposed to be a gotcha. So I'm going to have to do more reading.
Okay, let's wrap it up here. We made it through all the super chats, so appreciate the super chats and questions. We literally got enough questions during this epic endgame debate to keep us busy for probably a solid 6 to 7 hours. So we got to wrap it up here as we move to the 2-hour mark. So it's been a ton of fun. Kent, is that the London Hammer there? Did you want to make a couple points on it?
No, I have the London Hammer. There it is right here. Let's see. High school student dug this hammer up in their yard a few weeks ago. The handle has petrified from World War II. This was in Hawaii. That was at least 10 years ago, the email of the person who has it. If you'd like to see it. It might be in the Creation Museum in Texas, in Glen Rose, Texas. If you go over there, Grayson, if you'd like to see it. Here's a fossilized bowler's hat found in New Zealand. There's petrified fish giving birth, indicating petrification takes place pretty rapidly. Petrified cowboy boot with the cowboy's foot still in it. So the illustration is petrification can take place quickly. That's all. The fishing reel stuck in a rock. The rock turned to stone around a fishing reel. So apparently, it doesn't take long. What article, what magazine? Oh, Chattanooga Times. Okay, you can read that back 20 years ago. Petrified water wheel in Australia. Petrified, turned to solid rock in less than 65 years. Let's see. So I cover this on my video number 6 of my seminar series. rapid petrification. So that's the London Hammer. Maybe somebody can check that email, see if it's 20 years ago. Kidspot.org. Maybe that's, again, 20 years ago. I haven't updated that slide. Okay. The point is, petrified crayon, petrified pin.
I don't really have any issues with rapid petrification. I don't really see it as an issue.
All right, here's a petrified human being, the muscle, bone, everything petrified. 5'7", right. Now that it's petrified, it weighs 356 pounds. Petrified man found in Montana. Let's see. Meager chestnut, petrified sack of flour. This is the pickle we've got in our museum here, sent to me by David Crosby from Montana. The lid to the jar rusted off and the pickle turned to stone. I mean, it's right in our museum. Petrified toadstool. Kid sent me a bunch of petrified acorns. Ripley's museum has a petrified peanut cluster. Petrified charcoal briquettes. So a petrified arm from an octopus. Petrified jellyfish. How to petrify things. 100 years ago, they wrote books. You want to petrify your fence posts? Petrified teddy bear. We got that in our museum. Petrified hat. Petrified coil of rope. Point being, I think all the fossils formed in Noah's flood, not millions of years ago.
And I'll just summarize all this as saying, I don't think that rapid petrification is a problem for the evolutionary worldview or an old age of the earth. So
I'm sure you don't.
Okay, gentlemen, final question for tonight. Brandon, looks like we made it, so very good. Super chat, Kent. So for a little context, I think if I remember correctly, this came in around the time you guys were talking about Mount St. Helens and also Specimen Ridge and these localized, basically, catastrophes. And so Brandon's saying, so you're saying it was a local flood. Any thoughts on that, Kent?
I don't know how they got that from what I said. The Bible says Noah was in the ark for a year. That does not mean the whole world was covered for a year. The whole world might have only been covered for a few weeks. If the crust of the earth is flexing up and down like it still is today and twisting back and forth like the plate tectonics is still happening today, if that was happening during the flood, some areas of the earth might have been above water for a few weeks and then submerged. It might have been months. We'll have to watch the video when we get to heaven. No, it was not a local flood. It was a global flood. Destroyed everything. But the fact that Noah was in the ark for a year does not mean the world was underwater for a year. That's all I've ever said. Okay.
Thank you, Kent. Grayson, anything you'd like to quickly add?
Yeah. So I think Kent was showing that polystrate trees can be formed in a local eruption or flood. And so then it's a very logical thing to think that, okay, then the polystrate trees that we find were formed by local floods. I think that there's also, if he says, oh, well, they happen all over the world. Well, we have evidence that it has rained before all over the world. Does that mean that that's evidence that it was raining everywhere on the world at the same time? Obviously not.
Kent, final word?
No, nothing to add on that one.
All right, gentlemen, we made it to the end of this epic debate on the geologic column and fossil record. I really enjoyed the fast-paced format. We went 2 hours. We got a lot of solid audience questions in basically an hour and 15 minutes of nonstop back and forth discussion. You talked about a lot of topics, tons of fun. Okay, you want some quick final words, final thoughts? Let's start with you, Grayson. Thank you for doing this. This was the end game debate, so this completed what I would say is a very memorable 3-part series of debates between you and Kent. The other 2 are linked in the description box for people to check out. And so thanks for doing this, Grayson. Final words, final thoughts?
Yeah, so in my first debate with Kent, I demonstrated the evidence of evolution from genetics, and I debunked his notion of kinds. In our second debate, I demonstrated the evidence for evolution from the fossil record, and I debunked Kent on numerous things, from the way that sedimentary layers form, to radiometric dating, to plankton fossils, to tiktaalik, etc. And in this final debate, I touched on a lot of that ground before, went back to some of the topics that we covered before, which was pretty clear that Kent didn't really remember our previous discussions on it, didn't do any further reading up on it after our previous discussions, or, it was basically all the same talking points that we already covered in our previous debates. but it was good to be able to ask these kind of questions on a lot of different subjects. But the main theme for my questions tonight was showing that Kent's model of the flood is physically impossible and cannot describe the world that we see around us today. In reality, the flood model is completely inadequate and fails, and the model of evolution, geology, stratigraphy, genetics, all of these things combine to give us the naturalistic worldview that does explain the world around us that we see, with far less inconsistencies than Kent does, with far less physical impossibilities than Kent models does, and without having to wave away and appeal to miracles. So I was pretty happy with all the ground that we got to cover tonight. We even got to touch on physics and the Big Bang. So the only thing that is left that Kent and I have not discussed yet, which we hinted about talking about in our last debate, but we still have never discussed, is some of these age of the Earth type questions. Kent loves to talk about the weakening magnetic field or the moon's recession or all of these things that supposedly make it impossible for the Earth to be millions of years. So that is the main ground that I feel that Kent and I have still not covered in any of our discussions. So maybe we'll just leave it at that for the future. Thanks.
Okay, Grayson, thank you very much for the final words, final thoughts. Kent, over to you. Thank you for these debates. Of course, thank you for this debate trilogy with Grayson. Let's hand it over to you. Final words, final thoughts.
Well, Grayson certainly has declared himself the winner on every point. Why don't you go to a trophy shop and buy yourself a trophy? Yeah, please do. Put it on your shelf right behind you, okay? I think I've debunked everything he said tonight. I'm going to buy myself a trophy. I'm the winner of this debate. The God of all of his stuff depends upon billions of years. Got to have billions of years for it to happen. We don't observe any animal produce babies that would be considered a different kind. Nobody ever has in the history of the world. No farmer has ever seen his sheep produce non-sheep or cow produce non-cow or chickens produce non-chickens. But Grayson believes the chickens and cows have a common ancestor. And he's in there too. He's related to a chicken and a tomato and what was the other one? I forgot. Corn, yeah. You're welcome to believe that. That's not science. I think I showed clearly evolution is a religious belief. He believes in it strongly. Congratulations. That doesn't make it true. We don't observe it. You're way outside of science. Science is what we can observe. We can observe cows make baby cows. Our donkey just had a calf or just had a baby donkey 3 days ago. Our sheep had a baby sheep a couple of weeks ago. Our chickens our rabbits have babies all the time. They're always baby rabbits. Nobody ever sees what he imagines happened long ago and far away over billions of years. All he's demonstrated tonight is he's a religious zealot for his evolution religion. That's all.
Okay, Kent, thank you very much for the final words, final thoughts. Grayson and Kent, appreciate you guys making for a very engaging debate trilogy. Touched on a number of topics. To the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your support, your questions. Real quick shout out, May 1st. So I guess in a few days, we'll be having a debate open mic. It will be over on the Praise I Am channel. It seems like we're doing them about once a month. I moderated last month with Kent. Tons of fun. We went all night. We're going to be doing it again on May 1st. So Kent, we'll see you there. Grayson, I'm sure we'll see you there as well. So with that, God bless all. Maybe not. God bless all. And I will actually be back in about 30 seconds for some reminders and updates.
Sure. Really, I was going to plug a reminder because I do have a debate on this channel on May 4th. So I will not be on the open mic panel on the 1st, but I will be back here on May the 4th.
Yes, you've got the 2-part fossil record challenge debate, Professor David McQueen and T-Rock. So lots to look forward to.